Hello, welcome to the lecture on political parties in the state of Texas. Political parties' main purpose is to get like-minded individuals elected into office, various policymaking positions. With this purpose, political parties differ from political movements or political interest groups. Political movements concern themselves by trying to change the public's opinion on a particular topic, whereas political interest groups work to influence whoever gets elected into office, but they try not to impact the individuals who get elected into office. Whereas political parties are different. Their main purpose is to get like-minded individuals elected into office. By doing that, political parties serve three main functions. First and foremost, they simplify choices for voters. If we didn't have political parties, then each political candidate would have to run in elections by explaining various elements of their platforms, campaign platforms. So what their positions are on various matters, and which would mean that each candidate would have 10, 15, 20 different essential pieces of information to offer to voters. While this may sound like a good thing in terms of informing the voters, in practice we see that this would greatly turn off many voters from actually taking part in elections, because it would be simply too arduous for them to find out which particular candidate stands for what position in various issues. So by having political parties, we simply attach these parties' names to the candidates, and which simplify these choices for the voters and encourage them to take part in elections by voting. The second function political parties serve is that they also mobilize voters to voting by creating an identity for them. So this is similar to the first bullet point I mentioned above, but here the political parties are just simply creating an identity for voters. So individual voters would identify themselves as Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and what have you, and which psychologists tell us that increases their likelihood that they would participate in politics in various forms. May it be just canvassing or volunteering in campaigns or donating money or voting or just running for office. These are all different forms of political participation, and this happens more if people personally identify on a personal level with political parties. And thirdly, the political parties also create a reason for lame duck politicians to continue to perform well in their jobs. Here, a little background information. Lame duck politician is a term used for those policymakers or elected officials who know that they are not going to win or they're not going to be in their positions in the next term. There are typically two reasons for this. It's either the rules don't allow them to be in that position in the next time around. For example, a president on his second term would be considered a lame duck simply because he or she would know that our electoral system doesn't allow presidents to run for a third time in the office, so they know that they won't be the president in the next term. Or sometimes this happens because the official already knows that his main rival would be winning the elections. For example, public opinion polls could point to the fact that the sitting incumbent politician's main rival would be winning the election by a landslide in the next election. So in that case, that particular politician would be considered a lame duck politician. And sometimes it also happens for health reasons or family reasons. incumbent politicians may choose not to run in the next elections to make more time for the family or what have you. In that case, they are lame duck politicians as well. So the relevance here is that for lame duck politicians, political parties create a reason for them to do their job well. Because if we didn't have any political parties, those politicians would be running as individual political actors, which they would have no reason to do well in their lame duck years of service. Whereas now that we have political parties, they concern themselves with the image of their political parties. In other words, they would still want the nominee for that position of their own political party to get elected in the next term and replace them. So to not jeopardize those prospects of that person winning, they would still continue to do their best in their current jobs. In Texas, there are a number of political parties competing in each election, despite the contrary to the popular opinion. Most people think that it's only Democratic and Republican parties, but there are actually 10 different parties whose members compete in elections. Other than the main Democratic and Republican parties, we have the members of Libertarian Party, Green Party, Communist Party, Constitution Party, Workers, Reform, Unity, and Patriot parties taking part in elections. But unfortunately, because our system relies on winner takes all, which says that whichever party's candidate gets most votes in elections, that party wins all of the seats given to that particular state. It's only one of the two parties that have real chances of winning, and accordingly, it drives all of the voters to choose one of those two parties. That's a system political scientists call political duopolies. It's a form of a monopolistic system. In monopolies, you have one actor. Here, you have two actors competing in the elections. When we look at Texas politics today, we see that Republican Party dominates. At the national level, 66% of U.S. presidents who came from Texas were Republican, 2 out of 3 such presidents. In the U.S. House of Representatives, again, 66% of Texas representatives are Republican Party members. And in the U.S. Senate, 100% of them, which we have 2 senators like all other states, they both are Republican Party members currently. At the state level, the numbers go down slightly, but the Republican domination continues. The governor of Texas is currently a Republican Party member. Texas Senate, 61% of the members are Republican. At the House, Texas House, 55% are Republican. This picture creates a situation where partisan polarization is strongest in Texas legislature today. The 2 party members are unfortunately very polarized, which compromises their ability to work with one another to create laws that the people of Texas needs. And coming down to the local level, we see that the Republican domination dilutes even further. It's even less of a domination by the Republican Party. Only 33% of the largest Texas cities have Republican mayors. So one could argue that the Democratic Party actually dominates the mayoral elections in the state of Texas. And the reason for that is that at the local level, voters simply concern themselves with actual service, such as the quality of public works or the job creation performance of political leaders, and the political ideologies come second. They don't care about whether or not the candidate is Republican or Democrat. They simply vote according to the performance, which actually should be the way at all levels anyway, but at the local level, that's certainly the case, which is a good thing. When we look at the people of Texas, we actually see an entirely different picture, or I should say largely a different picture. Again, contrary to popular opinion, Texans are actually found to be only moderately conservative populace. In comparison to other states, Texas is only the 25th state with highest percentage of citizens who identify themselves as Republican. Only 43% of people who live in Texas identify themselves to be a Republican voter. Here in this slide, you can see the actual numbers that come out of such public opinion polls. This goes quite contrary to the Texas's reputation as the most red state in the union. The actual numbers show that that's hardly the case. It's a moderately Republican state currently, and the reason why the people are only moderately Republican, but their political leaders typically Republican Party dominates the political arena much more, is that the minorities, the African Americans and Hispanic Americans, vote overwhelmingly Democratic, as well as women do, but unfortunately they don't take part in voting as much as the majority. So as a result, when we do public opinion polls, we see that people are more moderate, but when it comes to election results, we see that Republican Party dominates more. When we look at the historical trajectory of Texas's political leaning, we see that an overwhelming majority of Texas's history, this state has voted Democratic. Starting from 1865, the year of Reconstruction, up until 1960s, for a good 100 years, Texas consistently voted Democratic in most elections. Starting from the 1960s, for a number of reasons, which we'll cover in a few moments, Democratic Party began to lose some votes, and starting from 1990s, Republican Party passed the Democratic Party in most elections, and since then it has been dominating the politics of Texas. When we look at the presidential elections, we see that 66% of presidential elections, Texas voted for the Democratic candidate, shown here in blue bars, and only 34% it voted for the Republican candidates, shown in red over here. As you can see, in recent years, starting from 1980, it's been a Republican dominance. So graphically speaking, 2/3 of all presidential elections went to Democrats, and only 1/3 went to Republican candidates in Texas history. When we look at the governors, we see that in the history of Texas, 23 out of 38 governors have been Democratic Party members, which is roughly about, I suppose, 65% or so. And the reasons for the Republican dominance is, starting from 1980s, is that the centrist white voters began to move from Democratic Party to Republican Party in this era. A second reason was that, by the way, this first dynamic is called white flight in some textbooks. So if you see this term, don't be surprised. That's what it refers to. In the second dynamic was that the Republican Party took a very strong pro-corporate stance in its platform, starting from 1980s. So as a result, the party could attract much more funds from corporations than Democratic Party did, and they turned around and spent much larger sums on political advertisements and campaigns, which in turn translated into increased votes for the Republican Party. A third reason was that the fact that less of the Texas population is African Americans in comparison to some of the other southern states. In Texas, only 12% of the population is African American, whereas in other states like Louisiana or Mississippi, this number is 30%. And African Americans vote overwhelmingly Democratic, so this is one of the reasons that explain the dominance of Republican Party.